Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadi Tamastu Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, now my turn to try and share the screen. March 5th in Asia. Our first topic is a recent question brought up the concept of the shumif perspective. I thought it would be useful to review the material on the 4 perspectives given in the Shum language. So this is the presentation. So Shum, informally known as Shum, but Shum is the formal name of the language. Now the mystical language of meditation revealed in Switzerland in 1968 by Gurudeva. It is often known simply as Shum and may be signified by the character Shum with a dot above it. This language comes from the inner areas of the heart of the mind and has a positive effect on the nerve system. Gurudeva created 12 simple meditation maps, one for each month of the year, called Mamsani, and had them carved into the pillars of Yerevan Temple so they would never be forgotten. That's a good way to preserve something, carve it in a pillar made of granite. Today we are looking at the August Mamsani, which is on the 4 perspectives, shumif, mulif, simnif, and dimfi. We have Gurudeva's description of the Mamsani. This is one of the most delightful Mamsani, naming the 4 different focuses of consciousness. The intelligence within each one of these 4 can and has taken lifetimes to know, to memorize, to investigate, cognize, and expand the mind into the depths which are there to be explored. But imagine this month gaining a superconscious glimpse of all 4 of these perspectives at one time. It's like an overview. So we're going to go through the 4 perspectives in terms of a simple English definition. If you want to make a note, if you're not familiar with them, it's probably good. Type it in, write it down. So shumif is the perspective of meditation. Simnif is the perspective of science. Mulif is the perspective of philosophy. Dimfi is the perspective of theism. And those of you who know how to read the Shum script may have noticed that the original Mamsani said Difi. Why does it now say Dimfi? Because Gurudeva revised a number of the spellings. And this one was revised. So now we have a longer definition. Shumif is the perspective of awareness flowing through the mind itself being unmoved. So it's like the traveler going through a city. The city doesn't move. The traveler moves and experiences everything. It's always in the same place. The simnif perspective is its opposite. The mind is moving and the intelligence of the person observing, such as a scientist looking through a microscope to the inner workings of matter, is stationary. The mulif perspective is the way of words, the way of the scholars of philosophical intellect. Its opposite is the dimfi perspective, which is just now coming into focus on this planet through the newly found abilities of being able to communicate with Mahadevas, Devas, and beings on all kinds of other planets, such as the Pleiades and this galaxy and beyond. Those in this perspective are not aware of being the center of all things, the shumif perspective, nor are they aware of the world's many philosophies, the mulif perspectives, nor are they much concerned about the nature of a drop of water, the simnif perspective. Their minds fly high in dimfi. So in dimfi, there's always another person. That's one way of recognizing it. It can be a deity or just a being. Who's not a deity. Okay, so now we go through in depth. Shumif, one of four perspectives, the meditative viewpoint of being awareness flowing from one area of the mind to another. The mind itself being stationary, we looked at that. The perspective of the Shum Chaif language. It is also simply called the Shum perspective. In Saiva Siddhantha, it includes the deeper meditative practices. So that was the original one-word definition. Shumif equals meditation. It is Advaita or a monistic viewpoint. So in this type of meditation, there's no other person. You're not meditating on the deity. You're meditating on yourself. You're going into your various states of mind. If you hit another person, that you've shifted to dimfi. Simnif, science. The scientific viewpoint of looking into matter. In this perspective, the mind is moving and the intelligence of the observer is stationary. Understanding comes through observing matter and achieving insights into its behavior. Very important part of simnif, observing matter and achieving insights into its behavior. So normally, if you think about science and Saivism, you don't see much science in Saivism, but Gurudev is pointing out with item number 4 here. Saiva Siddhantha includes the knowledge of Hatha Yoga, pranayamas, and the currents of the physical body. It can be dual, non-dual, or both, depending on the inclusiveness of the scientific theory. So there are theories, unified theories, in quantum physics that are of a non-dual nature. Mulif, one of 4 perspectives, the philosophical viewpoint of understanding theology, metaphysical, and psychological concepts. Realization is often attained simply through understanding deep philosophical concepts, which would be an intellectual realization, not a spiritual one. In other words, if we understand the concept that inner light comes from the friction between actinic and odic force, that's an intellectual understanding, but that doesn't mean we've actually experienced the inner light. In Saiva Siddhantha, it includes the intellectual study of Siddhanta philosophy, which is important. It can be non-dual, dual, or both, depending on the comprehensiveness of the philosophy. So a good intellectual understanding, good philosophical understanding is important, but it's not the end. We need to go beyond that into the actual experience. And dimfi, one of 4 perspectives, a metaphysical viewpoint of looking into inner and outer space. It is a perspective that acknowledges, understands, or communicates with God and gods, theism, beings on the astral plane, people from other planets. It is here that all psychic phenomena take place. In Saiva Siddhantha, it includes the consciousness of the Devas, Mahadevas, and God Shiva experienced in the temple. It is Dvaita, or a dualistic viewpoint. So it's always dualistic. There's you and the deity. Then we get an illustration. This is a bit obscure, but still it's nice to know. In this small illustration, the 6 little lines going out from the center to simnif, shumif, mulif, and dimfi represent the 7 dimensions, for the circle in the middle represents the first dimension. So if you count the lines, there's too many lines. So whoever drew this didn't draw what Gurudeva described. So it's supposed to have 7 dimensions only. The large curved lines as they relate to shumif and simnif indicate a continuing out into inner space endlessly. So those are the ones to the left and the right. Simnif on the left and shumif on the right. They keep getting bigger, they keep expanding. But in the curve of the lines as they relate to dimfi, top, and mulif, if they were to continue around, they would make a closed-in circle. We can see the limited nature of these 2 areas of the mind. So in dimfi and mulif, things get smaller as you go within. In other words, in these 2 perspectives, one can only go so far within until he is swung back into outer dimensions. Notice that in mulif and dimfi, the 2nd and 3rd dimensions are much bigger and more pronounced than the 6th and 7th dimensions, whereas it's just the opposite in shumif and simnif. The inner dimensions are more predominant. In the mulif and dimfi perspectives, the dimensions start big and get smaller because we are more in physical consciousness in these areas. 2nd is bigger than the 3rd, because in the mulif and dimfi perspectives, the physical world is more real than the 3rd dimension. The 3rd is more real than the 4th. In shumif and simnif, we're more in mind consciousness, devoid of physical consciousness and physical things. Therefore, we go on endlessly in the mind. Notice that in these 2 perspectives, the 7th, 6th, and 5th dimensions are all much bigger than the 2nd dimension. And of course, we come right down to the 1st dimension, which is the same in shumif, mulif, simnif, and dimfi, and is represented by the circle in the middle. You will find when you meditate on this Mamsani that the shumif and simnif are companion states of consciousness and inner awareness, meditation and science, as are the mulif and dimfi experiential perspectives, philosophy and theism, of human consciousness and awareness. These 4 major perspectives of the consciousness of human beings create their major inner mind styling. There is no relationship to ordinary life within these perspectives. Not one of them has a 2nd or 3rd dimensional picture. These are 4 names that capture and categorize consciousness into 4 divisions. Saivism can well name all 4. A fully developed Saivite should be able to experience at will each of these 4 perspectives, consciously live in 2, 3, or more at the same time, as did the rishis of yore. Gurudeva commentary. These 4 perspectives of consciousness are complete within themselves. Each one has its obvious limitations, yet each one is an area that people are caught up in and unable to move out of. There is a 5th perspective, dinamif. One spiritually unfolds into being able to be totally in one or another of the 4 perspectives, or all the 4 at once. This is to be striven for in the spiritual unfoldment Shaivite meditations produce. Shankara and Vedanta is the mulif perspective. Dualistic Saiva Siddhantha is the dimfi perspective, accepting everything, God's all life, the Charya Kriya path. The shumif perspective is basically yoga, and the simnif perspective is where people ordinarily are when not in Vedanta or Siddhanta. All 4 perspectives are utilized within Saiva Siddhanta. Gurudeva commentary. In Shumnam, the Shumif perspective of the 3 worlds and 7 dimensions of the mind does not involve us in the knowledge of the Devas and Mahadevas who live in the inner worlds. You would be experiencing through the shumif perspective exactly what the devas would experience in the second and third world, were they to meditate upon the Shum concepts. Shumif is pure Advaita. When we become conscious of devas, mahadevas, or our personal deity, we have transferred our perspective into what is called dimfi perspective, which is pure Dvaitist. Siddhanta philosophy is approached from the mulif perspective when it is intellectually studied, which is important, but not the end. And of course, Banasana, Hatha Yoga, the knowledge of pranayamas, kalibasana, the currents of the physical body, all relate to the simnif perspective. Its opposite is the dimfi perspective, which is just now coming into focus on the planet through the newly found abilities of being able to communicate with Mahadevas, Devas, and beings on all kinds of other planets, which we read that before. The dimfi perspective is very intriguing, says Gurudeva. It is definitely the path of bhakti, karma yoga, and there is always a God, deva, outer space person to be beholden to. One need not to know much philosophy to be in this perspective. People of all religions are here. Dimfi blended together with the mulif perspective releases the powers of philosophy and creates a monistic and pluralistic Saiva Siddhantha in one person. Breaking through the barrier from dimfi to the mulif is easy. It does take study, coaching from an accomplished adept, but when the two are blended, Vedanta and Siddhanta merge. When these two perspectives are blended with the shumif perspective, monistic Saiva Siddhanta bursts forth in all its fullness, meaning we're starting to experience things within us. And when these three perspectives are blended with simnif, monistic Saiva Siddhantas can then contribute to the betterment of this generation and the generations to come, meaning through scientific discoveries. Simnif perspective sees into the mechanism of growing things, what's in the earth making everything work, what's in the egg, what's in the DNA. So, an example, the four perspectives and personal problems. Gurudeva's commentary. To psychoanalyze your problems would be in the mulif perspective. To take them to the feet of Lord Muruga would be the dimfi perspective. To move awareness away from the problem into a happier state of mind and then look back and understand the karmas involved is the shumif perspective. To be injected by a psychiatrist with a chemical drug to alleviate the problem would be the simnif perspective. So, example. Common modern day problem, minor depression. This is not major depression. Minor depression, and look at how the problem can be solved through each of these four approaches. The simnif perspective is often favored, which is taking a prescription drug such as Prozac to chemically alter our mood. Discussing the problem with a counselor, psychologist, or psychiatrist is a solution from the mulif perspective. Going to the temple and placing the problem at the feet of the deity is the solution from the dimfi perspective. Solving the problem through meditation is the shumif perspective, moving awareness into a happier state of mind and looking back and understanding the karmas. And a further explanation, in helping a devotee, we use all four approaches. When everything is going fairly well in a devotee's life, we end up using just the dimfi and shumif perspectives. These two are the core of our Siddhanta philosophy, which is described as monistic theism, or practice which emphasizes both temple worship, the theism, and meditation, the monism. Advice relates to going to the temple and worshiping Lord Ganesha, or meditation on certain Shum concepts. However, when a devotee is somewhat discouraged, we rely on mulif, sharing the philosophical insights of Gurudeva. For example, everything is as it should be. Whatever you face is your own self-created karma. Lean on the power of your spine. This helps them become re-inspired to the point where they are able, through the practice of temple worship and meditation, to solve their own problems again. Sometimes simnif advice is also given, such as how someone would benefit by exercising half an hour a day, losing weight, following a better diet, and so forth. Oh, I hope that connected. It's a very interesting study, the four perspectives in the Shum language. Second topic, answering new questions sent in to satsang@hindu.org. My question is on the position status of Lord Vishnu in the Saiva tradition. Please clarify where this form of divinity is placed in Saiva thought, tradition, scripture. So the answer involves the denominational nature of Hinduism. So I found an interesting answer in Wikipedia which shows how widespread the concept is. Hinduism has no central doctrinal authority, and many practicing Hindus do not claim to belong to any particular denomination or tradition. Nicely said. Four major traditions are, however, used in scholarly studies: Vaishnavism, Shaivism, Shaktism, and Smartism. These are sometimes referred to as the denominations of Hinduism, and they differ in the primary deity at the center of the tradition. Nice British spelling there. Vishnu, literally the pervader, also known as Narayana, and Hari is one of the principal deities of Hinduism. He is the supreme being within Vaishnavism, one of the major traditions within contemporary Hinduism. Shiva, literally the auspicious one, also known as Mahadeva, literally the great god or Hara, is one of the principal deities of Hinduism. He is the supreme being in Shaivism, one of the major traditions within Hinduism. So I like to give the answer in this way. Hindus all believe in a one supreme being. They just don't agree on the name and nature of that supreme being. In other words, Shaivas say, oh, the supreme being is Shiva. Shiva's nature is this, and this. Vaishnavas say, oh no, the supreme being is Vishnu. His nature is this, and this, including the concept of avatara, which you don't find in Saivism. So this strict division, in India you find it. In Orthodox Shiva temples you won't find a shrine to Vishnu. In Orthodox Vishnu temples you won't find a shrine to Shiva. In fact, particularly Orthodox Vaishnavites won't enter a Shiva temple. It's interesting, we ran into an interesting situation in the Chicago Lamont Temple. They have a large temple to Venkateshvara and then a smaller one to Shiva. Oh, most of the priests are Telugu priests trained on Pancharatra Agamas, Vaishnava priests, but they will do pujas in the Shiva temple. However, there's one North Indian Vaishnava priest, he won't even enter the Shiva temple, let alone do a Shiva puja. You know, he's following the old tradition. These are separate traditions. We don't mix them. So the separateness, Gurudeva was concerned about it. He can occasionally complained about the modern trend in building temples outside of India to have both Shiva and Vishnu in the same temple, meaning in the same building. He said having two supreme beings in one temple would confuse Hinduism in the minds of the devotees. Gurudeva favored separate temples for each. So one temple can have two buildings. That's what he thought was the best way of handling it, which in many places in the U.S. they do have, generally the bigger places. So then there's another way of approaching it, which is the famous Vedic quote, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, meaning truth is one, the wise describe it in different ways. So that's approaching it from the top down. Truth is one, meaning there's only one supreme being. The wise describe it in different ways. To Vaishnavas, truth is Vishnu. To Shaivas, truth is Shiva. So two different, totally different denominations. So traditionally, you don't find Vishnu in a Shiva temple or in Saivism, and you don't find Shiva in a Vishnu temple or in Vaishnavism. Our third topic, sincerity, which is the 56th character quality from our character building workbook. How would you define sincerity? Simple one. The workbook gives this definition. Sincerity means being without deceit, pretense, or hypocrisy. I practice it by being genuine and honest and refraining from making statements I don't really believe in. The opposite is insincerity. And Gurudeva's first quote. It takes great sincerity in life to control the mind. And the power to be sincere is based on honesty. Honesty, arjava, gives a great boon to you. It gives you stability, makes you strong. It makes every atom in your being vibrate with an inner power, gives you perspective, gives you the eye to justice. But you first must be honest with yourself. Second quote. The word insincere describes a person who doesn't fulfill what he knows he should fulfill, but pretends that he does. We call him insincere. That insincerity doesn't hurt anybody but himself, because you can't send anything out into the world but that it comes back. Nicely said. Comparing the actions of one who is sincere to one who is insincere. First situation, your best friend just won a minor league riding award, so you. Sincerity, congratulate her appropriately for her achievement. Insincerity, exaggerate the accomplishment, pretending the prize is more important than it really is. Second situation, your sister notes that her boss is being too pushy and you. Sincerity, tell her this is the trait you yourself are working on. Insincerity, criticize him, knowing inside you have the same issues to overcome. Third situation, at a community town hall, everyone is asked to give a Christian prayer aloud, and you, sincerity, keep silent as the group prays to Jesus. Happens in the U.S. Insincerity, join the chorus, all the while feeling like a fool for giving in to peer pressure. Reflection, take a moment to identify a few ways in which you could improve in sincerity. And the assignment, during these 2 weeks, regularly reflect on your words and actions in the light of sincerity. Thank you very much.